Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for coming. My name is Emily Arvizu. I'm a 2L here at Maine Law. During my time here at Maine Law, I have had the absolute privilege of working with Professor Johnson. And this past fall, I worked with her to research and articulate the Supreme Court's mandate in Padilla versus Kentucky, which requires a recognition of a right to counsel for non-citizen defendants in misdemeanor cases who are facing deportation. So while the Supreme Court hasn't explicitly extended this mandate to the misdemeanor context, the underlying justifications for the felony context are equally applicable in the misdemeanor context. So before getting into the Padilla case, I want to talk about why this issue is so important. For the majority of Americans, including attorneys, there's a real lack of understanding about the ways in which criminal law and immigration law intersect with each other. And this lack of understanding puts non-citizen defendants in a place where they're really some of the most disadvantaged players in the adversarial model of justice. So what that means basically is that for a lot of these non-citizen defendants, the first time that they realize there are immigration consequences for their convictions is when they're actually picked up by ICE. Because they aren't sentenced to jail time, they didn't have court-appointed attorneys, so they never even realized that their immigration status might have been in jeopardy. Next, I just want to talk about the characterization of these immigration consequences. So, immigration consequences, as you know, can be incredibly harsh. Deportation is a really harsh consequence. And while the Supreme Court has been reluctant to characterize deportation as a criminal punishment, they've been very clear about the harm that this imposes on non-citizen defendants. So, for example, the Supreme Court has characterized deportation as the equivalent of exile or banishment. In the Padilla case, they recognized that deportation is such a severe consequence that some people may be more concerned with trying to avoid deportation than they are with trying to avoid jail time. And then all of this is happening within a justice system which is becoming increasingly connected to immigration law. So changes in immigration law over time have made it so that there are more and more and more immigration consequences to these criminal convictions. So then in Padilla, in the Supreme Court case, they recognize that non-citizen defendants have a right to effective assistance of counsel, and this includes a right to advice regarding these immigration consequences of their crimes. But then the problem here really is that if they're not sentenced to jail time, they don't have an attorney, and then they're never given that advice that they're entitled to. So this is really where the logic starts to break down. Deportation is such a harsh consequence that they have this right to advice, and yet they don't have an attorney to give them that advice. Where felonies and misdemeanors carry that same penalty, it then makes sense that if somebody can be deported for a felony and can also be deported for a misdemeanor in the same way, then that right to counsel should extend to the misdemeanor context. So bringing it a little bit closer to home here in Maine, I want to talk about what we can do here to protect non-citizen defendant rights. First and foremost, we could go ahead and recognize a right to counsel for these non-citizen defendants. We don't have to wait for the Supreme Court to explicitly mandate it. Short of that, you could develop and implement an immigrant service plan. And basically what this would do is it would ease the burden on individual attorneys by institutionalizing these processes for defending non-citizens. And then lastly, we could expand the current contracts that are in place to provide immigration law consultations to attorneys who are defending non-citizens. In conclusion, the failure to provide non-citizen defendants with counsel in the misdemeanor context really calls into question the fairness of those proceedings. These life-altering consequences, including deportation, really necessitate this need for counsel for these non-citizen defendants who are trying to protect themselves in a system that's increasingly complex and increasingly punitive. So where the mandate is already there, Maine really needs to start taking steps to follow through on that. So I will be in the lobby after if you have any additional questions.